Rise up!
This is Howard Balzer, and welcome to this Cardinals update for the Rise Up See Red podcast, the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Sometimes I really wonder if many people watching the NFL just dropped down from a far, far away planet and have never seen the league before and never watched an NFL game. That's the only thing I wonder about. Well, there's other things I wonder about, honestly. But that's one aspect that I always wonder about when you hear reactions to certain things. Oh, I can't believe what I just saw. How could this team beat that team? What a surprise. Well, I believe the word surprise should never be uttered by anyone who watches an NFL game on a week-to-week basis. Think of this. In week 3, with 2 games still to be played on Monday night, there have already been 8 road teams win games and 7 games decided by 1 score or less, with 3 of them by a field goal. Yes, those are the numbers I'm talking about. And yet there will be those who will ask coaches, do you believe in momentum? And Jonathan Gannon was asked that this past week after the Cardinals' big win over the Rams. And he acknowledged, well, maybe there can be some confidence built. But then he said the magic words that is often said about the NFL and is the one thing that you can always predict accurately. It is a week-to-week league. And momentum or lack thereof hardly exists. How else do you explain the Carolina Panthers beating the Las Vegas Raiders a week after the Raiders beat the Baltimore Ravens on the road? The Panthers, of course, famously benched first-round quarterback from last year, Bryce Young, and replaced him with Andy Dalton. And all the Panthers did was race to a 33-7 lead in the fourth quarter before the final score made it look a little better than it was with a 36-22 win. Chuba Hubbard, the running back, looked like an all-pro. Deontay Johnson, wide receiver, the same thing. And Andy Dalton merely passed for 319 yards. Or how about the winless Denver Broncos defeating the Buccaneers, who beat the Lions last week? A team that, of course, came into State Farm Stadium and defeated the Cardinals. The Rams team we mentioned earlier lost their first 2 games of the season on the road, looked horrific in last week's game against the Cardinals, have lost wide receivers Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp, have had all kinds of changes in the offensive line, and all the Rams did today was come back from a big lead to the 49ers and win their home opener. So that is why no one should ever be surprised by what happens. But one thing with the Cardinals is that we can see some trends after 3 games that explain why the Cardinals are 1-2, and the 2 losses have been by 1 score or less to the Bills and, of course, to the Lions. In fact, dating back to the beginning of last season when Jonathan Gannon took over as head coach of this team, the Cardinals are 2-7 in 1-score games. Just turn that around. Well, yeah, maybe 7-2 would be too much to expect, but even 5-4 would have it be a much record than it has been. And what we have seen in these first 3 games seems pretty obvious. And there will be some will talk about Kyler Murray's ill-advised pass to Marvin Harrison in the end zone that resulted in his first interception of the season. And they'll talk about other faux pas during the game. But the one thing that is consistent in the 2 losses this season to the Bills and the Lions is the total lack of a running game. In the game against the Bills, a 6-point loss, James Conner and Trey Benson combined for 63 yards on 19 carries. But it was 17 for 37 without their long runs. Conner for 20 and Benson for 6. Conner in that game, without that one big run, had 15 carries for 30 yards. The chains don't move when you are running the ball poorly. That was obvious in the win over the Rams, when James Conner went for 122 and had 4 big runs in the game, and the Cardinals were excellent on third down. Not so much against the Lions, when the Cardinals were 1 for 9 on third down after hitting the first one of the game and then missing their final 8. And several of them were manageable, but it just didn't work. Kyler Murray, who had been 11 for 11 on third down in the first 2 games of the season, and yes, had a passer rating, which some insist on calling it perfect, at 158.3. In my adjusted passer ratings, it was actually 200.6. Not so good against the Lions when he was 3 for 7 for 21 yards on third down for a passer rating of 50.3, which was only that high, and obviously it really wasn't high, but it would have been a lot worse if he'd had an interception among one of those 7 attempts. And 13 of the 21 yards came on a 3rd and 17 play to Greg Dortch, which made Matt Prater's 45-yard field goal, well, I shouldn't even say easier to make, because he makes them from 50 yards or more routinely. But it's still better to have a 45-yard attempt than one of 50-plus. So think of that. 2 of Kyler Murray's other 2 completions only went for a total of 8 yards. And one of them was on a successful 3rd and 2 to Michael Wilson. So when you're doing that on third down, again, you're not moving the chains and you don't have time of possession. And it severely affects your ability to win, especially when the game is close. Actually, the way we should be looking at this is that as poor as third down was, and as poor as Murray was on third down, it was still a 1-score game late. And the Cardinals, if they could have made a stop, would have had the ball with a chance to at least tie. But, of course, that didn't happen. As good as the Cardinals played in the second half on defense, they weren't able to come up with key stops at key times. One on a Jared Goff run, and one, the final Lions, one of the final Lions plays right before they just bled the clock on a successful 3rd and long to Amon-Ra St. Brown. So even though you're playing better, you still have to come up with those plays at the key times to give your team a chance to win. And that running game today, Connor, Trey Benson, and Amari DiMercato, they totaled 32 yards for the entire game on 13 attempts. And if you take away Connor's run for 7 and 6-yard runs by Benson and DiMercato, they only had 10 carries for 13 yards. As Jonathan Gannon said, we just couldn't run the ball. You're hoping for an explosive. You're hoping for one to pop, but they never did. And the Lions had that. As much as you can look at this game and say, hey, defense hung in there, and they certainly played hard, Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery had 5 runs totaling 76 yards. And those can be backbreakers. So that's what we're looking at here with this team. We can see it's better. We can see it's improved. But if you want to make it count consistently in the win column, then obviously have to win those close games, have to be consistent on third down. And, of course, the running game has to be there a lot better to make the passing game work. And you still have to respect what the Cardinals did. They were down to their 4th right tackle in this game after Jackson Barton, elevated from the practice squad, replaced Kelvin Beachum, who injured his hamstring in practice this week. And then Barton goes out with a toe injury and is replaced by Charlie Heck, who was just signed a couple of weeks ago to the practice squad. So when you look at that, going against a very, very good defense, you can only say that, hey, the Cardinals battled, but they just came up short, but for a variety of reasons, which again are traced to third downs and the lack of a running game. Now the Washington Commanders come in next week. They're playing the Bengals on Monday night. We'll see what they can do as in that game. And then, of course, here in Arizona with Cliff Kingsbury as the offensive coordinator and former Arizona State quarterback, Jaden Daniels under center for them. So, but nothing can be taken for granted. We all should know that in the NFL. No one should ever assume that things will work the way you believe they should. Because in the NFL, we can post all the cliches we want on any given Sunday, all those things. But they're cliches and said a lot because they're absolutely true. And so we'll see how the Cardinals build from this as we have another week to get ready. And we'll see if Kelvin Beachum hopefully will be ready for next week. And we'll see how bad that toe injury is for Jackson Barton, who, with only 13 snaps in the NFL, being on teams for 6 years, he came in and really did a solid job and helped give the Cardinals a chance to win this game. It wasn't to be. We have a sense there'll be more wins as the season goes on, but that consistency is what makes the difference in the NFL, and especially winning and not losing those one-score games. That wraps up this Cardinals update. This is Howard Balzer for the Rise Up, See Red podcast. We'll be back again soon.
Thanks for listening to the latest edition of the Rise Up, See Red podcast. Listen to previous episodes and subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher Radio, Audioboom, or many other podcast platforms so shows are delivered directly to your mobile device. Please give the show a 5-star rating and always support the sponsors who support the show. We'll be back soon for the best hour of Cardinals talk on the web. Rise Up, Red Sea, Be Red, See Red, and of course, Rise Up, See Red.
Rise